Hello again, everybody. I am Andy Brady with the Easily Amused channel. Welcome back to anyone who's seen my previous videos. And if you have seen some of my previous videos, you might have heard me mention that I'm actually an indoor air quality expert. That is my trade. I've been doing it for many years now, and I thought now's the right time to record a video about indoor air quality, specifically microbial growth, funguses, bacterias, dust, dander, pollen, yeasts, things like that that are floating in your air, causing your air to be, according to the EPA, 4 to 5 times more polluted inside of your home than it is outside of your home. Why should you care? You might not. But if you've got a shower that looks like this, or if you've got a vent from your HVAC system that looks like this, or if you've got a random wall in your house that looks like this, then chances are, even if you don't know, you should know and you should start caring. Let's get right into it. All right, so back to what we were talking about. Most importantly, why should you care? Why do you care if there's mold inside of your home? Why do you care if you've got some kind of microbial growth inside of your home, right? It's normal, it's natural. The number one thing that I hear from people when inspecting a home, inspecting a property is it's normal. Mold's normal, it's natural. Well, that's correct. It is normal and it is natural. And the levels of mold that you'd find outside are considered normal and natural. And if you're not doing anything in your home to cause the mold growth to go up or go down from the outside levels, then your numbers inside of your home should equal the outside levels, and that's considered normal. But many years ago, when I was just getting into the industry, I was meeting with a psychologist, specifically talking about people who are hoarding because they more likely have things in their air quality that causes them to be sick. And they said something to me that's meant a lot for a long time, and that is normal is a setting on a washing machine, not on a person, right? So you throw your clothes in, you can click normal, but you can't walk to your neighbor and click normal, right? So what's normal for one person is not normal for everyone. And then I'll speak to people who are, let's call them naysayers. They're not worried about mold in the slightest. And what they'll usually say is something along the lines of it's normal, it's natural, right? That's being the first one. So is a rattlesnake. Still don't want it in my living room, even if it is natural. But the other thing they'll say is, I spend a lot of time outdoors. I go hiking. I go camping. I spend a lot of time out in nature. I'm exposed to mold all the time. And again, that's a normal level of mold. But what you're probably not doing is setting up a tent over top of a half-rotten log covered in mushrooms, right? We go outside to experience the normal levels, and we don't actually put ourselves in the same situation that we would be in if we're talking about a house with elevated levels of mold. So what is elevated levels of mold? It's basically, if you have more mold in your air quality than you have outside, it's elevated levels. If you have physical growing mold inside of your home, it doesn't matter the levels, it's automatically more than it should be, because similar to the rattlesnake in my living room, you should not have mold growing in your home. So while it's naturally found and is floating through the air at all times, it's not something that you should be allowing to get worse and worse and worse, like compounding interest for the negative, where it's just going to keep getting worse and worse and you're going to be negatively affected by it. So how do you get negatively affected by it? Because it's natural, again, right? So we all have a certain level that we're able to be exposed to without an issue. Again, normal is a setting on a dryer, not a person, because everyone's normal on mold is going to be different of all kinds of funguses. So a perfect example is bees. A normal level of bees outside, for me, is not an issue. I can walk around, I can be around wasps, bees, whatever, and if I happen to be stung, I'm fine. But we all might know somebody who carries around an EpiPen because being stung by even one bee is too much. And then on the other end of the spectrum, while I'm not allergic to bees, if I stumbled into some of these nightmare bees nests that you can find on YouTube where the entire attic is full of bees and I get stung hundreds and hundreds of times, chances are I'm still going to the hospital. At some point, there was too much exposure to the venom, the toxins inside of the bee sting for my body to handle it. And for mold, this is something very real for a lot of people, that they're over that level too often. They've been overexposed to it at home, at work, whether they own the buildings or whether they're renting the buildings, and they're being overexposed on a daily basis, and they're kind of always at that cusp where they're already almost too much, and then they get exposed to more, and then they start having health issues that go along with it. So the reason that you should care is there's a lot of people who believe that that threshold gets lower and lower the more overexposed that you are to yeast, funguses, mushroom spores and mold spores floating through the air, not to mention the toxinogenic properties that may or may not be present for certain molds in certain situations. So the reason that you should care is because it should not exist in your home, whether you're renting, whether you own it. If you've got situations like those 3 pictures that I showed at the beginning, those are issues that we need to start taking care of. So the question is, when does a mold problem move from being a DIY to I need to bring in professional intervention? And what do I do at that point? Because that's a big question for a lot of people. And I have to go through this a lot of times with a lot of people, not because I'm handling people on an individual basis, which I don't do much anymore. My job now is I help people who want to start new remediation businesses or new air quality businesses. I help them get started. So I'm more of an advisor, teaching them what to look for, how to find it, and what to do next. So I want to share some of that information with you guys, and that's the whole point of the entire video. So, the picture I showed before, the mold in the shower, let me show it again. All right, so this picture here, if you've got mold like this over top of the shower, then chances are you're not running your fan long enough. Okay, that seems like a very easy answer, but a lot of people, they refuse to turn the fan on, especially teenagers. They want to listen to music on their cell phone that's sitting next to the shower, so they won't turn on the fan. It's too loud. It's annoying. Or some people are just driven nuts by the sound of a fan, so they just don't run it. But theoretically, a problem like I just now showed you could have been solved if the homeowner, actually this was a renter, if they had turned on the fan the moment they turned on the water, kept the bathroom door closed, gotten their shower, gotten out of the shower, left the fan on, closed the door on their way out, and left the fan running until the humidity level in that room was back to the same humidity level of the rest of the house. So essentially, they need to dump all of that moisture out of the house. And the reason that we leave the door closed is we don't want to start getting mold, just like you saw on the shower ceiling, on the right outside of the door in the hallway. And we see that all the time because people, they think if I leave it open that the humidity will spread through the house and that will make it better, but it really doesn't do that. It really, starts soaking into the first thing that it comes in contact with. What about mold on vents? Like the picture I showed you before. So here's that again. So this is a HVAC vent, and it is just standard mold found on an HVAC vent. So what does that mean? So if an HVAC is running extremely efficiently, then the air conditioning, the air coming out of the HVAC can be upwards of 100% humidity. And there's lots of molds, including the ones I just now showed you in the picture, that will grow not because there's liquid present, but they'll grow because of the humidity. So you get over 55, 57, somewhere around there % humidity, and there are molds that will grow based on the humidity alone. They don't need physical liquid. They don't need a leak. They don't need a dishwasher that's leaking out behind it for months on end to get, to the point that they were in that picture. It's what's going to be called a xerophilic mold, actually. It's a mold that can grow based on humidity. And this happens a lot on vents. This happens a lot on HVAC systems. So again, when do you handle it? When do you call in an expert? What is your next step? And I want to talk about that because that's the big one. All right. So we know that you have mold in the house, or you don't. Hopefully you don't. Maybe you're just learning something interesting here. Hopefully you find it interesting. So you have this issue, and who should handle this issue? A lot of people immediately want to run out and they want to hire somebody like myself to come in with testing equipment, and they want us to run checks, run tests, find out what kind of mold is it. Is this the black mold? Is this the kind of stuff I should be worried about? And again, back to my original example, you don't want a rattlesnake in your living room, correct? But you probably also don't want a black snake in your living room, unless, of course, it's a pet, I guess. But it doesn't matter if it's natural. And in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter what kind of mold it is. If you can find growing active mold inside of your home, it's the bad kind of mold, because it should not be growing inside of your home. Again, your indoor and outdoor levels should be the same. But if you are literally growing it in your home, then you're going to have higher levels inside of your home than you do outside. So regardless of the type of mold that it is, that is not the important part. The important part is you have growing mold and we need to find a way to get it out. You'll hear people that will tell you that certain type of molds you need to act on quickly. Some of them you don't. You've got the dreaded black mold, which is called Stachybotrys, is the most common of those types of molds. But little known fact to most people is there are molds that have the ability to produce toxins, and there are molds that don't have the ability to produce toxins. There are molds that sometimes do and sometimes don't. And this is a widely debated topic, and you can get lost in YouTube videos for weeks on end trying to find out more about this. But there's over 100,000 different types of mold. And identifying the specific type that yours is not the crucial element, because let's take one of the worst, not necessarily the worst, but the most common, called black mold, which would be Stachybotrys. It has a toxinogenic potential, but it does not always produce toxins. So because you have that in your home doesn't mean you're being exposed to toxins. You could just be being exposed to the mold spores. If you have it in your home, don't say, hey, this doesn't mean it's not producing toxins, because you are still being exposed to the spores. And again, mold shouldn't be growing in your home. So again, this comes back to this idea that if it's growing in your home, it's not important what kind it is. It's not important what strain it is, unless you have a doctor that's specifically requesting to know exactly what it is. The important thing is getting it out. So who can handle these kinds of problems? Well, it depends. So if you do go the route to get testing done beforehand, there's a couple different ways of doing testing. And I want to talk about a couple of them real quick, because this will come back to the end of the video as well. You have devices there on the real low end to the real high end. This is just one example. This device will suck air in through one side, blow it out the other side, and it's got a laser that counts particles. Okay, it counts total particles in the PM2.5 and PM10 particle size, which is smaller than the naked eye can see. So it's just going to give you a count. And then, some of them will give you a rough chart on the back. This is good, this is bad. The issue with a device like this is if you have somebody come in who is a mold remediation company, or is an air hygienist, or an inspector, a home inspector, whoever they might be, there's a couple important things. One, they cannot identify what type of mold it is by sight. They can make educated guesses because of the environment it's in, and because of years of experience, and because of being able to surmise this has been wet for an extended period of time. It's probably not a humidity-based mold, though there might be some of that in there. So they can start to calculate what this could be. But until they put it underneath a microscope, they're not going to be able to point to it and just say, that is Stachybotrys, that is black mold. So if somebody's doing that to you, they may be trying to scare you. So stay back from that, unless they've got that preemptive, hey, it looks like it could be Stachybotrys. I mean, it looks like all the other cases of Stachybotrys I've had. It looks like a duck and, walks like a duck. There's a good chance it's a duck. But a particle counter along those same lines of not being able to identify, a particle counter counts all particles. That would include bacteria, that would include pollen, it would include dander, skin cells, dust mite waste, insect parts, insect feces. This is all stuff found in your air quality at all times. Sorry, I hope I didn't just now lose you, because that's gross, I know. But this counts overall air quality particles. And while it is true that there are numbers that you should be within, it's important to know that this does not distinguish mold. So if somebody comes in to look at a moldy environment, or what's believed to be a moldy environment, you bring in a professional and they bring in one of these and only one of these, and they look at it and they say, that's black mold, that's the bad stuff, you got to get it out of here. And then they turn this device on, or a device similar, and they look at it and they say, oh my goodness, your number's off the chart. That number off the chart could definitely be getting influenced by the mold. But it's not just going to be mold that it's picking up. So you're going to want to use this kind of test as another tool in the toolbox. If somebody has this should just be one more thing that they can use to try to diagnose the overall issue. But this, again, is not going to identify specifically mold. Some devices that I'm not going to have to show you because I don't own them. The Petri dishes that you can get at your big box hardware stores. They are agar plates. You set them out and the mold is supposed to just happen to fall on it and happen to start growing, happen to hit all the right conditions. And then you're supposed to look at the growth and try to compare and tell me you have a problem. But again, we discussed mold is everywhere. So when you set those plates out, they almost always grow mold. I've rarely ever seen one that doesn't. Not only that, but because they weren't done by a professional, there's always this calling into question of, did they smack their couch cushions above it to try to get as much dust and stuff onto it as possible? Did they put a fan over top of it? Was it just by accident? They weren't trying to mislead somebody. They put it underneath the ceiling fan that's running. So now we're blowing more onto the plate than would have normally fallen. Then you also have the issue of your typical worst molds. Let's go back to Stachybotrys, is usually in a very wet environment, and its spores don't always become airborne. So it might not show up on a test like that at all, any kind of air quality testing, even though you can visibly see it and you can see that there's an issue. And then others, some of your, again, xerophilic molds, your humidity-based molds, some of them are so small, such as an aspergillus. It's so small and so lightweight that studies have shown that it can actually come in contact with the agar plate and then keep on moving right past it. So that might not show up. So even though those tests look great because, the pictures of the blooming of the mold and the bacteria and things like that, and they're only $10 at your big box store, they're not worth the $10 because they don't really give you very much information aside from the fact that there is mold, but we already established there's mold everywhere. So what would the actual step be in testing? So you could swab a test, and what a swab would be used for is one thing and one thing alone. Is what I am swabbing mold, and are there what's called hyphal stems present? So if you can imagine a dandelion, right? So you blow on it and a bunch of little seeds come off. Well, a mold spore, most of them have one seed, one spore on top that gets blown off, and you're left with the stem. That stem is called a hyphal stem. If you swab any surface anywhere, you're probably going to find mold more often than not. Because again, mold is everywhere, right? So if it's in your air and it happens to land on your walls and you swab a random wall, you're probably going to find presence of mold. What does that tell you? That doesn't tell you anything. So what you'd be looking for is, I see something I think is mold, and for some reason I want to or need to identify what kind of mold is it. So then you may swab it, or you might do a tape lift, similar to getting a fingerprint, on the CSI shows, things like that. And you might send it off to a laboratory for them to identify the type of spore that is visible and to let you know, are there hyphal stems? And the reason that it's important to know if there are hyphal stems or not is similar to the dandelion. All of those seeds got blown off, but what caused the hyphal stem to come out, right? Unless it was agitated, unless it was, moved, plucked, pulled, maybe a lawnmower ran over it if we're talking dandelion still, or you're swabbing physical growth where there's a ton of those hyphal stems. And so those stems are showing up on the report. So now we can say, not only do we think we see mold, this is the type of mold that we think we're testing, and there's presence of the hyphal stems, meaning we are probably swabbing somewhere where it's currently growing. So that'd be one type of testing, and that would be a surface sample. And a surface sample should really only be used to identify. It should not be used. A lot of times somebody will do a swab and they'll call you and they'll say, oh, it's got so much on the swab that, you've got a problem. That's not always the case. A square inch of, moldy surface could have millions of spores on it. And depending on how they swabbed it, how many square inches they did, how much they rubbed it back and forth, they could collect a ton or they could collect barely any. So that number is completely irrelevant. That needs to be part of the visual inspection. The next part would be air quality testing. And I've got a couple examples of what a professional would have, something like this that has what's called a rotometer on here, where you can hook it up to a spore sample that will actually trap everything sucked in through this on here. And when it sucks it in through here, this has a microscope slide, gets sent off to a laboratory, and they can identify, they can count, and they can estimate how much is actually in your air. One like this can be individually calibrated on the site to set it at the liters per minute that this specific spore trap sample would need to have. They might have something that looks completely different. They might have one that they send off, well, they all need to be sent off to calibrate, but one that they send off more often to calibrate. They don't really change the liters per minute up and down very much. Again, the spore trap goes right on top of here. This runs usually set up on a tripod, and going to run this for 5 minutes. Again, sending the sample out, and they can look all different kinds of ways, different kinds of devices. They pretty much do the same thing, though. They do a controlled amount of air through a controlled sample that collects all mold spores. They send this off to an independent laboratory who will do a physical count and identification to tell you these are the types of molds that we found, and this is the quantity of those molds that we found. That is a test that's a little bit more of, instead of the swab, of, oh, there's a ton on the swab. This is more of a controlled sample. And by that, I mean, if you had 3 people come in your house in the same day at the same time and run the same test, they're going to get almost identical results. Whereas 2 people swabbing the same surface might get very different results. So this is a repeatable test that has been done, hundreds of millions of times, and it is the most accurate way of finding out what's going on in your air quality whenever you handle mold. So when do you call somebody to come in and do this? Well, again, it's back to who can handle this. Once you have growing mold, I hate to say it, but it's kind of a losing battle at that point. Because mold does continue to grow, it does continue to sporulate, to continue to pollute the environment with mold spores. Even if you successfully wipe down and clean the mold in the area that you see mold and you're trying to take care of, what about the hundreds of trillions, millions, billions, whatever, of spores that have floated through your environment and landed on your shoes, your clothes, your rugs, your carpets, your bedding, your whatever, right? So, excuse me. So, who can handle this? Typically is not going to be a homeowner. It's unfortunately not typically a DIY issue. And the reason is, if you go look at your big box store at all of the mold killing products that they have available, there's one thing in common on all of them, that they all will say stain remover. Or they will claim to kill mold and fungus, but they'll have an asterisk next to it. And when you read the little, part at the bottom, it will say on a hard, non-porous surface such as concrete, plastic, or metal. So it will kill mold where there is no root system, which is not that impressive. But if you've got mold on your ceiling in your bathroom, that's drywall, that's paper and paint, 2 food sources for mold, and it's going to have a root system. And using a chemical, let's say, using bleach and peroxide as examples. We hear bleach, we hear peroxide, we hear alcohol, we hear vinegar. None of these things are successful mold remediation products. And the reason is because, let's use bleach as an example. You have maybe 5% hypochlorite, and the other 95% is water. And when you go to scrub the surface, the hypochlorite reacts with the organic surfaces and it bleaches it, right? Same thing peroxide does. It will bleach it and it will take the staining away. So your problem is solved. Except that chemicals such as peroxide and hypochlorite have a very difficult time absorbing into the building materials, and to the point that they almost don't absorb into it. The surface kind of filters it, which means it's not getting to the root system and destroying the actual root of the problem. So back to our dandelion example, using bleach, peroxide, some of these other products would be very similar to mowing your yard to get rid of your dandelion problem. Yeah, you might kill where it's growing right now, but there's still a root system that's going to continue to grow and continue to produce, which is why we see people have scrubbed the same spot with bleach hundreds of times, and it still just keeps growing back and growing back and growing back because the original problem was never solved. And that's why, for the most part, mold remediation is better left to professionals. People who are not going to cross-contaminate it. The amount of buildings and homes that I've been privy to where somebody has decided to self-remediate and has ended up polluting and destroying hundreds of things in their home, or hundreds of square feet of other areas in their home that could have been professionally taken care of to begin with and cut all of that off from happening. And if the professional remediators did not do their job properly, they need to have mold insurance. They need to have an insurance policy for a mold remediation company, which is very different than general construction, very different than plumbing, very different than painting and drywall and stuff like that. They're going to have construction insurance, and they're not going to have anything to do with mold. In fact, their insurance is going to specifically, exempt mold from their policy. And so what will happen is the wrong person, people, company, whatever, will try to remediate. And if you do it yourself and you make the problem worse, you've got no one to blame. You hire a company who is not a remediation company. They're a buddy, they're a handyman, they're whatever. They might have all the best intentions and they might do an amazing job. But if they accidentally spread the problem and make it worse, their insurance is not going to pay for it. So if a $3,000 mold remediation job, making up numbers, becomes a $70,000 mold remediation job, who's going to pay for it? If you can't go to their insurance company and claim a claim against them and have the insurance company pay for the service to happen, then somebody's coming out of pocket $70,000. Or maybe somebody's business goes out of business and you never see a dime out of it. So it's very important that once it's on organic materials, that a professional is called in who's going to come up with a plan. They're going to have HEPA grade vacuums. The vacuums, not just the filters. So your Dysons that are HEPA grade, not the same as a mold vacuum. A shop vac with a HEPA filter put into it. Well, the filter is HEPA, but the vacuum is not. So neither of those examples are going to be sufficient for something like remediation. They put a fan in the window, or they run your bathroom fan. I've seen that before. And they're trying to control the airflow that way. And they're not calculating how many square feet of room or cubic feet of air is there, how many turnovers do we have, how much negative air pressure do we need to contain everything in this room. So they're not trained for that, and neither, unfortunately, is a DIYer at home. In fact, the amount of jobs that we have done for individuals who previously worked for mold companies, they were trained in mold. They know, but they don't have $10,000 worth of equipment to bring into somebody's house or into their home to remediate that bathroom for them. So they will hire somebody to do it because they don't have access to that equipment, because it's priced out of reach for somebody who only needs to do one job. Beyond the fact that even though that person is trained, that the average person is not trained. So what about, general contractors? Already talked about that. If they have mold as a rider on their insurance, you just need to verify it. And that's very easy. You can ask somebody for proof of insurance, and you'd like to speak to their insurance agent. And you would also maybe like to have yourself added onto their insurance to make sure that if there is a claim needed, you don't have to go through them to make the claim. You can go straight to the insurance company to make a claim. And when you divulge to them that they're doing a mold job, hopefully their insurance company doesn't drop them, that they're saying that they're covered for mold and they're actually not. Unfortunately, I've seen that before as well. What about your maintenance? Let's say that you're a tenant. Let's say you rent, whether it's a commercial building or a residential building, an apartment complex or a house or whatever it might be. And they've got maintenance, and they send the maintenance guy over, and he scrubs the ceiling with something, and he paints it with Kills, and he paints it with the shield paint that's antimicrobial, while it's wet, but it's antimicrobial. And then the problem keeps growing back and keeps growing back. Well, are they qualified to do it? Well, the answer is no, because again, they're not going to be insured for mold. So if they end up destroying your belongings, again, how are you going to get that paid for? And more importantly, all the things I just now named is not going to take care of the issue. You cannot paint over mold on an organic surface. It does not work. It will grow back through. If you can imagine the fabric that you put down in your yard, it works for a little while, but eventually you start to get sprouts coming up through it. It will break through and it will make its way through. And the same thing is true of painting, of any kind of paint over top of actively growing mold where the root system is still active. It's going to grow back through. And again, all chemicals that I know of that you can buy in a big box store, none of them will claim to kill the root system of mold. So if you're not killing the root system and then you're painting over it with Kills, or you're painting over it with shield paint, and then you're putting in acrylic paint or whatever, it will delay, but the inevitable will still happen. It will grow through. And did they do anything to take care of the air quality in the entire building? So again, I hate to harp on it, but who should handle this? A professional. And even after a professional handles it, how do you know that it was done well? Well, I already explained the number one thing that you can do. You can have a visual inspection, whether it's by a third party, or if you're in a state that allows remediation companies to do their own testing, you could choose to trust them and let them do their own testing. Or you can call in a home inspector or an air hygienist, somebody independent to come in and do testing. Testing is what's going to show this is the air quality in your home and it's elevated or not elevated compared to outside. What needs to be done after that? Because now you have polluted air because of this mold problem that was improperly taken care of. But I've got one more important thing. If you are a tenant, most, if not all, companies that do testing will avoid doing testing for a tenant because they can't, or they don't want to, or they can't afford, being the big one, to be stuck going to court over and over and over again in a legal battle where they said that a previous company didn't do a good job, or they say that the landlord or tenant or the landlord's fault or the tenant's fault, or whatever it is. So they are typically going to reach out to the property manager or the property owner to get permission and have them be present while they do testing. So there's no question as to what they did. It is open, honest. You can see, you can watch, we can all be part of this, so that if I hand you test results, I can walk away and you never need to talk to me again. And if you guys are going to have a dispute, you have your own dispute. What happens when the property owner or the landlord says no? They are uninterested in having air quality testing done. They've already had the remediation taken care of. Their maintenance guy worked for a mold company for years, and they know what they're doing. They know how to handle it, and we don't need to be, we don't need verification. Well, mold remediation can automatically be considered unsuccessful until you have some kind of proof that it was successful. And just because something looks better, it's been beautified, it's been painted over, it's been replaced, doesn't mean that the actual problem was resolved. So there is one other item that I want to talk to you guys about. And I'm going to put a link on Amazon to this, as long as it's still available there, or a link to their website. And I will tell you guys, I do make a small commission if you do purchase it using my link. Not why I'm recommending it, not why I'm talking about it, but if you choose to purchase it, I'd love it if you use my link. This device is called a My Mold Detective. Remember me telling you that a Petri dish sample is not good. A swab sample doesn't give you enough information. And then there's other testing methods out there that include Swiffering around your house, include vacuuming certain surfaces through a filtering membrane and sending it off to the laboratory. Again, though, just like a swab sample, it's not the whole story. It's not the whole picture. And those results can be nullified pretty quickly. So let me get this thing opened, and then we'll show you guys what is it, what does it do, why do you care, again, why do you care, and how could this help you? All right, so we got this thing open now, and what is it? This is a homeowner's version of something like this. So it's not the kind of thing that you would send off and get calibrated. It's not the kind of thing that you'd be trained on how to use. So keep in mind your results from this may be called into question, but I've got some answers for that as well. The pump on this is nowhere near as consistent as the pump on this one. It is not tuned anywhere near as fine. So 2 tests in the same area with this back to back could yield slightly different results than when you bring in a professional who runs the same test twice side by side, and you're going to get pretty much identical test results. So this is not a substitute for bringing in a professional. And no, that's not just a way of me trying to get you to call more professionals, because there's a chance maybe I trained many of them. But it is just honesty that this is a consumer grade product, not a commercial grade product. And if you've got a company that you call to come in and do testing and they pull this device out, you need to call into question their authenticity and their ability to run tests. They might be amazing, but you should at least be on the lookout for it. So what does this device do? This device plugs in and runs very similar to how the other ones do. It runs an exact 5-minute test and it stops the test. So you've got the same type of spore trap samples, as they're called, and you place it on here and it says up or down. And it's even got a place where you can mark outside, bathroom, kitchen, whatever. And different ones of these on Amazon that you purchase will come with a different amount of samples. And it's important, you have to get an outdoor sample, because again, everything is compared to the outdoors. And in the box, jumping ahead of myself, in the box it comes with a couple things. One, it comes with an instruction guide, which also has links to YouTube videos that teach you exactly how to use this device. It comes with a certain amount of samples, depending on which one you purchase. It could come with them. You can also go straight to them and buy more samples, take as many of them as you want. It comes with a FedEx Express bag, at least this one did. What they're using today, I do not know. The box you get today, whatever day you're watching this, could be different, of course. And it came with a label for being able to ship it to them. So what you would do is you would plop this on top of here and you would click go, and 5 minutes later you would have a not professional but verifiable, much more trustworthy sample compared to a swab or an agar plate or anything else like that, especially compared to something like somebody coming in with a test device like this and testing it, and they say, oh, well, your air quality is not great, but that's not mold, so you're good to go. Like, no. So running a test like this is something you could do as a tenant or as a homeowner, and you get to keep the device. Buy more of these and send them off for sampling. I don't know at this time of recording how much this cost or how much it costs to get the sample analyzed, because it's 2 different prices. You got to buy these, and then when you drop them in the envelope and you send them off, there is a price for getting it analyzed. The last I checked, it was between $40 and $50 to get this analyzed. So realistically speaking, if you were going to do one sample outside, one in your bedroom, one in the moldiest area of the house, where you assume that there's a mold issue, and one in the utility room, you've spent $200 getting samples analyzed, plus the cost of this, plus the cost of this. So this is a great thing for a homeowner to have, and it's a great thing for you to be able to run tests throughout the year for cheaper than bringing in a professional. But when you bring in a professional, you'll also get an inspection. And this, the best way to word what this is a thermometer for a sick person, right? If you are sick at home and you put a thermometer in and it comes out 98.6, well, chances are you don't have a fever. Is it 100% correct that you are not sick? No. But at the time, it seems you do not have a fever. If you put it in and you have 103 degrees, Fahrenheit, of course, and that is when you would start saying, oh, wow, I now need to go to the doctor. And when you get to the doctor, you get to the professional, you say, whenever I checked my temperature, it was 103 degrees. Well, something you might not know is thermometers are plus or minus a couple degrees. Even the most advanced ones might be plus or minus a half a degree. So you're going to a professional with data, with information, so that they can basically recapture all that information, so that they, as the professional, can see the sample being taken, they can see how you are, they can do a visual inspection, they can have a conversation with you, they can do all these things. So this is similar to having a thermometer at home. It is the kind of thing that points you in the right direction, tells you, I need to call a professional. You run a test on this and the air quality comes back squeaky clean, I would be less likely to bring in a professional. Again, unless you see visible mold, because regardless of what's in the air, visible mold must go. But let's say that, let's say you are a tenant, let's say you are renting, and you decide you want to run a test like this and it comes back squeaky clean. Good to know. Wait a month or two. Buy another 2 of these, run another one in the area where the mold was and another one outdoors, and just see, is it growing back? Is the problem getting worse than it was before? Again, comparing that outdoor sample to that indoor sample, not comparing it to the previous one, but comparing the ratio between the two to see, is my air quality getting worse or is it staying the same? Is it getting better? What's going on? But similar to a thermometer, if somebody does remediation, let's say this maintenance guy who knows exactly what he's doing comes in and does the remediation for you, and you happen to buy one of these because they're completely uninterested in getting third-party testing, they're completely uninterested in having somebody else come in and verify that it was successful. You run this test, and your spore count is 15 times higher inside than it is outside. So let's say you have Aspergillus outside at a 100 count, and you have it inside at 1500 count. Well, that's automatically going to throw up some red flags that the numbers, they need to be closer to the same. And, 10 times higher than the outside level is definitely, starting to get to the numbers of I'm calling in a professional, or I'm demanding that somebody calls in a professional to get this looked at. So very useful device, very nice thing to have, especially for what the cost actually is. Just keep in mind it is not the same as professional equipment. So if I still did air quality inspections, air quality testing myself, and you were to call me and you were to say, can I send you my report from here? I would say, absolutely, please do. Just like your doctor would be interested in what was your thermometer reading. But I'm going to look at that and I'm going to take it with a grain of salt because I know it's not a professional device and I know that you have not been professionally trained. There are 100 things that an inspector might look for or notice that is wrong with an environment before they decide to run a test that you wouldn't even have begun to think about because you haven't gone through any kind of independent certification, testing, training, anything like that. There is something you can do, though, because you don't want to spend the money on this, send it off to get a sample, and then immediately have somebody like myself or a property manager or somebody who's selling you a home say, that is a residential grade, not commercial grade, and we don't know where the sample was taken or how it was taken, this, that, and the other. You don't want them to call into question your sampling, which they're going to do. So I have one big recommendation that I've never seen on their site. I haven't been to their site in years, but haven't seen on their paperwork, hadn't seen on their YouTube videos years ago when I used to watch them, that I've never heard them say, but I'm going to 100% say, is I would have a witness who witnessed all of your testing, and it's not going to hurt to have a 25 to 30 minute video with no cuts, no cut scenes, straight recording of the samples being collected, the 5-minute sample running, the sample being taken, taped, or the tops and bottoms reapplied, the serial number being documented in the video, marking where it is that the sample was taken from, putting it in here, putting the stamp on it. You've already registered this, you're already ready to go. I literally would walk all the way down to the blue post office box, to the post office, or in an apartment, might walk straight to the box so you can drop off your mail where it's unretrievable, and I would drop that off and record me leaving as it is. Think about it from my perspective. You tell me you have one of these devices, and I know that after as many years as I've got of experience, that there could be things that you do incorrectly. You tell me, hey, I've also got a 20-minute video of me recording where I sampled, how I sampled, the environment around me when I sampled, the sealing of it, the sending off, the mailing, and everything else. Now I'm going to start believing this a little bit more, not just because, I won't believe it anymore, based on the device, because the device is still consumer grade, but I'm going to believe it more based on the fact that you were able to take a sample and that you didn't do anything nefarious. Perfect example of why people will not trust this device. You put this on and you run it for 5 minutes. And then you decide, I'm going to run it again for 5 minutes. And then I'm going to run it again for 5 minutes. Well, now you've run this for 15 minutes and told the laboratory that you only ran it for 5. So now whenever they say that you have 1,500 count, they're going to say, wow, that's a problem because outdoors was 100 count. But in reality, it should have been a 500 count. You cheated and you ran it 3 times. Now, I'll be honest with you, most laboratories can identify there's a lot of little things hidden inside of this capsule. There are ways for them to notice or be alerted to the fact that this sample might not have been taken correctly, or that there might be some other issue going on and that retesting may be recommended. So, even if you did try to cheat the system, there's a good chance you'd be caught. Even if you successfully cheated the system, you're going to have somebody like myself or any other, you might have an air hygienist, a home inspector, whatever it might be, come in and they're going to run their own samples. Please do not be offended by that. You could be taking the best samples in the world. But again, going back to the doctor, if you took your own blood sample and took it to your doctor, they're going to then take another blood sample, right? Because there's things that you could accidentally miss, not for nefarious purposes, but just miss because you haven't been trained in it. You haven't read the books on it. You don't have a relationship with a laboratory that you talk to on a regular basis. You don't go to yearly trainings or monthly trainings, and you're not engrossed in the environment of testing. So automatically, it's going to be kind of called into question, but I highly recommend something like this, especially if you are in an environment where you are being told air quality testing will not be done. We will not be bringing in an inspector. Depending on who you are and what environment you're in, there might be lots of reasons why you might be interested in running a test on your own to try to get an idea of what's really going on, because it's your air, you're breathing it, regardless of where you are. And if your air quality is making you sick, you can't see it. You got to get a sample. And an at-home sample kit with the information that I've told you so far in this video could be all the steps you need to get in the right direction. So anyway, in summary, probably need to have a professional remediate any growing mold within your home, business, office, rental, whatever it might be. Even if you hire a company who is well known, who is professional, who has a great reputation, they got 500 5-star ratings on social media or on Google or wherever, they can still make mistakes. And whether you pay third party to bring professional testing in or you decide to go this route, just know if you go this route, they're going to want to bring in their own third party and they probably will bill you for it. But the point is, if you write a check for $20,000 to get remediation done, then you should be willing to pay $200, $400, $600, $800 to have somebody come in after the fact to verify that the remediation was done successfully, even if it is just as simple as getting an air quality test from a professional or doing it yourself. It is very important for your health, for your safety of your children, your pets, for everything inside of your home, for the well-being of the belongings in the home, for all of that, that you run a test professionally or personally, and make sure that your air quality is exactly what you paid and what you want to be breathing every single day. Andy Brady with Easily Amused. If you stayed around this long, thank you so very much. I know it's a very long video, but there's at least 100 more topics we could go over, and I'm thinking we will start uploading more of those. They will not need to be as long because they will not discuss testing per se. They'll be more on an individual basis, so they should be shorter videos. But if you did stick around this long, I'm guessing you learned something, you found it educational, you found it fun, or forbid, you have an actual mold problem and this was informative to you so that you can make the right decisions. Please give us a like and subscribe so that we know that you're interested in this kind of video so that we can continue to upload more of them in the future. So thank you very much. Andy Brady with the Easily Amused channel.